I don't know how we survived it all. I think we were very lucky. Now that I think about it during the day, it seems like a dream or a hallucination. It's hard to believe it could have happened, and to us. But I'll tell it in order. It was the end of summer. The nights were no longer very hot, but it was still warm enough during the day. Me and a guy I know are going on an outing to a long looked-after area near St. Petersburg. We're digging. We are called black archaeologists, or black diggers. Our season is not particularly long. As the rains come, you can't dig anymore. The clay will spread, and that's it. Neither the tent to put up normally, nor the excavation to cover. Only in the forest to dig remains, and there are their own difficulties. Well, that's just me digressing. That time we were going to dig just in the forest. My friend Max is a complicated guy, unsociable. He's an ethnic German, and he's a big fan of fascists. He has been digging for a long time, but more often alone and in the Smolensk direction. But here he dug up a map of some kind, and says that it seems to be a good place. His equipment is good, and he has enough experience, and if you don't argue with him, everything should go well. So we went together. We packed sleeping bags, tools, food for a couple of days, and loaded on the train. Max, what makes you think that everything hasn't been opened up? There are villages there, and it's not far from St. Petersburg.
I think that we have some time left. The area is swampy. Rarely anyone goes there. Let's check. Maybe the swamp has dragged it all away, maybe not.
We got there. We unloaded. According to the map, we had to go through the field, then through the forest by ravines, only 15 kilometers. We fastened our luggage more comfortably and set off along the edge of the forest, so that the valiant police would not get in our sight. At first we took a good pace, and the forest was dry and clear, but deeper we started to run into bogs and blockages of trees, which we had to force as far as possible. The bogs were small and shallow at first, overgrown with grass and trees, and then began to meet larger ones, with bumps, with places of dark standing water. We reached the desired place at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was warming up. Max and I were both sweaty and tired. We put up a shelter. I went to collect firewood for the night, and Max unpacked the dipstick and moved to the swamp, checking the map. I should say that I went only out of great interest. Max usually traveled alone and didn't open his sources, but he always found interesting things. I was sure that he wouldn't have gone to the place if it didn't smell like a big catch. While I was gathering firewood for the night, he had already identified something and was marking it. We decided to start digging in the morning, as soon as it was light. It was getting dark early, and by evening it was dusk in the forest. In such light, it was easy to miss something important. Max returned to the fire, and I could see him pocketing a copy of the map. The notes and inscriptions were in German. "Do you get your sources from German archives?" I asked casually.
Sort of. I have good maps.
I know half the forum is jealous of you. Everyone wants to go digging with you. How are things there, by the way, at the swamp? You find anything?
I haven't dug yet, I'm just noting. Everything's beeping, maybe a car or a tank sank. Or an airplane fell into the mire, though it would be beeping otherwise. We'll see in the morning.
Max made notes in his notebook. What happened here? Tell me.
Here, a company of German punishers from a rather large group, stationed in the nearest villages, was leaving the Russians through the forest. According to the documents, they entered the forest and did not leave. Approximately in these places, they encountered the Russians and all the Russians were shot. Further on, the traces are lost and I have not found any papers. Maybe we'll find some Soviet soldiers, some weapons. Maybe Germans. I think they bypassed the swamp on the left edge. The right one is more marshy and takes a few kilometers towards the village. It was February, but the bumps should still be visible. There is even something like a path on the left. The contours of the swamp roughly coincide with those on the map.
Max explained quietly, but it was clear enough. It seemed that he had been preparing for this outing for a long time. It got dark, and we settled down to sleep. The fire was gradually extinguished. The fog came from the swamp. It was getting colder. I fell asleep quite quickly and slept without dreams. I was awakened by a strange gurgling sound, but at first I thought I had imagined it. I lay half asleep, listening to it. Then I started to fall asleep again, and I heard it again. It sounded as if someone big was splashing in the swamp, sniffing. I propped myself up on an elbow and gazed into the milky mist. Maybe a cow from the village had come into the forest? It shouldn't have, it's far away. It's about 5 or 6 kilometers away, if not more. Max next to us also stirred, getting up. We looked at each other and looked into the darkness. There was more splashing, as if there were several people there. Something clanked softly, and even voices seemed to be heard. Are we not the only ones here? And did some other diggers find out about the swamp? Or are there people here with other purposes and they don't need us as witnesses? I regretted that the only weapons we had were knives and shovels. Although somewhere in the luggage there is an axe, but against a gun, if anything, will not help. We lay quietly, looking toward the swamp, and soon we began to distinguish silhouettes. Several men in long cloaks or coats, wading right in the mire. My vision didn't deceive me, no matter how much I rubbed my eyes. They were walking right there, among the bumps and dark pools of water, talking quietly among themselves.
What the hell is that?
Max whispered, and the men froze as if they'd heard. They turned their heads toward us at the same time, and one of them held up his hand, pointing in the direction. I don't remember jumping out of my sleeping bag and running without looking through the bushes. I didn't get far, though. I tripped over a root and collapsed, badly twisting my leg and breaking my nose. Max was even less fortunate. He got tangled in his sleeping bag, and in a couple of seconds the pursuers were already around him. I was lying in the bushes, afraid to breathe. I felt like the hairs on my head were standing on end, and I would never be able to sleep again. I covered my mouth with my hands to keep from screaming, and tried to remember a prayer, which, as luck would have it, had vanished. Max was surrounded by men in decayed uniforms with remnants of German patches. What I had first taken for cloaks turned out to be the remains of winter overcoats. The creatures were leaning over him, and I could see clearly that they had no eyes, no noses, and some had ears and lips. They were kind of swollen from being in the water for so long. Whitish. There was water dripping from the remains of the mold. "Russ?" wheezed one of them, pointing a rusty weapon at Max. "No, I'm German. I'm a German citizen. I love the Führer." Max squeezed out in German, swallowing nervously. One of the drowned men brought what was left of his face closer to him, as if he wanted to examine it. Max was blonde, white-skinned, and a fan of the Germans. That's probably what saved him. The dead man examined his military-style cap, a German knife, and a flask lying nearby. Max had picked them up at Smolensk. Then he slowly uncurled himself and waved to the others. They went along the left edge of the swamp, just where we had thought from the morning to go, and almost immediately got bogged down in the mire. We both shook and watched the Germans drown, shouting and clinging with dead hands to the bumps and pulling out tufts of grass. At last they disappeared into the silt, and it was quiet again. We lay still. I was beginning to feel pain in my sprained leg and broken face, and Max was baring his teeth so loudly that he could be heard a mile away. We hastily grabbed our things, leaving half of our stuff behind, and walked toward the village, along the right bank of the swamp. It was hard for me to walk, but to stay was more frightening. All the way we were silent. At about 7 in the morning, we came to the village and knocked at the nearest house, where the light was on.
"It's something to think of. They went to explore our swamps, just the two of them, so young."
The old woman was moaning. We told her that we were researching bottom sediments on the Institute's assignment. We couldn't tell the truth.
"The locals don't go into the woods after dark. My father told me that when the blockade of Leningrad was broken and the Nazis were chased away, one group hid in the woods and ours pinned them down in the swamps. Well, the Germans shot ours but died in the swamp themselves. And apparently people were so angry that the land did not accept them. So they walk at night, climb out of the swamp and wander in the forest, and as soon as they meet someone they immediately put a machine gun in his face, and if you speak Russian, they drag him to the swamp with them, and they drown there themselves. Even expeditions came as if to lift the remains, but where could they find them now?"
We ate homemade eggs with onions and black bread in silence. I didn't want to answer Granny. I bandaged my leg and we walked towards the highway where we caught a car and returned to town. We never visited those parts again.